Rain battered the iron gates of Ashbourne Manor with the fury of a grieving widow, while inside the great house, candlelight trembled against marble walls and painted every whisper with gold. Servants moved through the corridors like nervous shadows, carrying silver trays no guest intended to touch. Beyond the tall windows, carriages gathered one after another beneath the storm, their wheels sinking into the muddy drive as London society arrived to witness the quiet ruin of a marriage once envied across England. No scandal traveled faster through aristocratic circles than disappointment. Lady Evelyn Ashbourne had learned that lesson cruelly. 2 years earlier, when she married Adrian Laurent, Duke of Ravenshire, the newspapers called her the jewel of the season. Artists painted her pale beauty beside vases of ivory roses. Elderly duchesses praised her manners. Young women envied the way the Duke watched her during their wedding supper, as though the crowded ballroom had vanished and only she remained beneath the chandeliers. Yet admiration was fragile currency among the noble class. It vanished the moment happiness showed the slightest crack. Now those same drawing rooms fed upon her humiliation with exquisite delight. She could not even provide him an heir, murmured Lady Whitmore behind an embroidered fan. They say he has not visited her in nearly a year, another woman replied softly. And today he comes for the divorce. The words drifted through the manor like smoke beneath a door. At the far end of the upper corridor, Evelyn stood alone in her bedchamber, listening without expression as her maid fastened the final row of pearl buttons along her dark blue gown. The garment had been tailored carefully to disguise the gentle swell beneath her ribs, though 7 months of pregnancy could no longer be hidden completely. One hand rested unconsciously against her stomach while thunder rolled across the distant hills. Perhaps his grace will not stay long, the maid whispered cautiously. Evelyn met her own reflection in the mirror. Once, poets had admired the brightness in her eyes. Tonight they seemed older, dimmed by months of silence and unanswered letters. He shall stay only long enough to end what remains, she answered. The maid lowered her gaze, unable to reply. For several moments, Evelyn remained motionless before the mirror while rain crawled slowly down the glass behind her. She remembered another storm long ago, the final evening Adrian had touched her with tenderness instead of suspicion. He had returned unexpectedly from Parliament that night, exhausted and proud, still smelling faintly of cigar smoke and winter air. They had argued beside the fireplace until anger dissolved into grief, and grief dissolved into something far more dangerous. By dawn he was gone again, colder than before. 3 days later, rumors of her infidelity reached him in London. Within a month he abandoned her entirely. She had not seen him since. A knock sounded below. Not loud, not dramatic. Yet every servant in the house seemed to freeze. "The Duke has arrived," someone whispered downstairs. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. Even now, after all the loneliness he had dealt her, her pulse betrayed her. From the grand staircase, she could hear the heavy doors open against the wind. Boots crossed the marble floor below with measured authority. Adrian never hurried. He carried power too naturally for haste. When Evelyn finally descended, conversations died one by one beneath the glittering chandelier. Nobles turned subtly away to conceal their fascination, though curiosity shone nakedly across every face. At the bottom of the staircase stood the Duke of Ravenshire, tall and severe in a black overcoat still damp with rain. Time had sharpened him. The softness she once loved around his mouth had vanished entirely, leaving only aristocratic restraint carved like stone across his features. Yet the moment his eyes lifted toward her, something faltered. Evelyn saw it instantly. His gaze dropped unwillingly to the curve beneath her gown. The silence became unbearable. One elderly countess inhaled audibly behind her gloves. Adrian's expression hardened with terrifying control, but his hands clenched once at his sides before stilling again. "You did not inform me of your condition," he said quietly. "You forfeited the privilege of knowing it." A faint color rose along his jaw. For a moment neither moved while rain hammered mercilessly against the windows. Then Adrian removed a folded document from inside his coat and extended it toward her. "The petition has already been prepared," he said. "Once signed, the separation shall remain private." Private. The word struck her harder than cruelty would have. Not grief. Not regret. Merely convenience. Evelyn accepted the papers with steady fingers despite the ache rising inside her chest. Around them the guests pretended not to watch. Then Adrian spoke again. "Whose child is that?" The question landed softly, yet its humiliation cut deeper than a scream. Evelyn lifted her chin, every fragment of wounded dignity gathering behind her eyes. "Yours, your grace," she answered. though you abandoned us before you cared enough to ask. For the first time since entering the manor, the Duke looked genuinely shaken. His gaze searched her face as though hunting some visible trace of deceit, but whatever certainty once protected him now seemed dangerously fragile. Slowly, almost unwillingly, his eyes lowered toward the physician's seal attached beside the divorce papers in her hand. The conception date stared back at him like a loaded pistol. And suddenly the terrible arithmetic of betrayal no longer aligned. A gust swept through the chimney, scattering sparks across the hearth while murmurs erupted among the watching aristocrats. Adrian did not seem to hear them. His attention remained fixed upon the date, upon the impossible realization dawning beneath his disciplined composure. Evelyn watched the color drain from his face and understood, with clarity, that someone had poisoned his mind against her long before tonight. Yet before she could speak again, the Duke folded the document, lifted his eyes toward hers and whispered, "Dear God, what have I truly done?" By morning, the scandal had traveled farther than the rain clouds that drifted above London. In velvet-draped parlors and crowded gentlemen's clubs, society abandoned politics, trade, and war for a far more delicious catastrophe. The Duke of Ravenshire had arrived to divorce his wife and discovered her carrying his child instead. The tale spread through the aristocracy with cruel embellishments, each retelling sharpening Evelyn's humiliation while stripping her of dignity piece by piece. Yet the greater shock was not the pregnancy. It was the fact that the Duke did not leave. 3 days after the confrontation at Ashbourne Manor, Adrian remained beneath its roof like a restless ghost. Servants watched him cross silent corridors long after midnight, his expression carved with thought too heavy for sleep. He dismissed lawyers twice, ignored invitations from Parliament, and burned the unsigned divorce petition in the library hearth without ceremony. No explanation followed. Such silence only fed society's hunger. Evelyn understood that better than anyone. From the drawing-room windows she often glimpsed journalists lingering beyond the gates, hoping to capture evidence of the marriage's collapse. Sometimes she heard distant laughter from passing carriages and knew precisely whose name lingered behind it. Still, she refused to hide herself away. Every morning she dressed carefully in elegant gowns despite the exhaustion shadowing her delicate face. If society intended to devour her, she would at least meet its gaze standing upright. Adrian noticed that strength constantly. One bitter afternoon he entered the breakfast room to find Evelyn seated beside the fire with a book resting untouched upon her lap. Pale winter light spilled across her dark hair, illuminating the faint weariness beneath her eyes. Pregnancy had softened her figure but sharpened something deeper inside her, as though suffering itself had refined her into steel wrapped in silk. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "And you should be elsewhere, Your Grace." The distance in her voice unsettled him more than anger would have. A servant approached then with tea, but his trembling hands betrayed nervous curiosity. As he poured, his gaze drifted briefly toward Evelyn's stomach before lowering again. Adrian's expression hardened instantly. "You are dismissed," he said coldly. The servant froze. "Your Grace. You appear more interested in gossip than duty. Leave this house before noon." The young man turned pale and hurried from the room without protest. Silence followed. Fire crackled softly against the marble hearth while Evelyn stared down at her untouched tea. "You need not defend me from whispers," she murmured at last. "They existed long before today." Adrian stepped closer slowly. "That does not mean I shall permit them." The words lingered strangely between them. That evening a package appeared outside Evelyn's chamber door. Inside rested a bundle of white roses tied with silver ribbon, their fragrance delicate enough to stir memories she had spent months trying to bury. No note accompanied them. She almost ordered the flowers discarded, yet something restrained her hand. The following morning another gift arrived. A sapphire necklace glimmered against black velvet, its blue stones identical to the color of her eyes. Evelyn stared at it for several moments before quietly shutting the case. Apologies, she thought bitterly, were always easier for powerful men when wrapped in jewels. Still, Adrian continued. On the 4th day he requested that she accompany him to Lady Barrington's annual charity gala, an event attended by nearly every influential family in London. Evelyn refused immediately. "I will not parade myself before people eager to dissect my disgrace." His gaze held hers steadily. "Then allow them instead to witness your dignity." Against her better judgment, she agreed. The ballroom blazed with candlelight that night, chandeliers scattering gold across polished marble floors while an orchestra played beneath ceilings painted with cherubs and storm clouds. Conversation faltered the instant the Duke and Duchess entered together. Hundreds of eyes fixed upon Evelyn's visible pregnancy, then shifted toward Adrian with naked fascination. No one understood why he stood beside her. Lady Whitmore approached first, smiling with venom disguised as politeness. "Your Grace," she purred, "London feared your poor wife had become unwell." Evelyn answered before Adrian could speak. "Fortunately, disappointment has not yet proven fatal." A few startled guests concealed laughter behind gloved fingers. Then came the cruelty she had anticipated. The Dowager Countess of Norwood stepped forward beneath the glittering chandeliers, her expression sharpened by decades of aristocratic malice. "One hears extraordinary rumors lately," she remarked lightly. "Though I confess society still wonders whether the child shall inherit Ravenshire features." The insult landed like shattered glass across the ballroom. Evelyn felt every gaze swing toward her. Before she could respond, Adrian moved. Without hesitation, he placed one protective hand against the curve of Evelyn's stomach and faced the entire room with terrifying calm. "This child," he said clearly, "is my son and the future heir of Ravenshire. Anyone who questions his legitimacy questions my honor directly." Silence swallowed the orchestra itself. The Dowager Countess paled visibly before retreating into the crowd. Yet Evelyn barely noticed. She remained frozen beside Adrian, painfully aware of the warmth of his hand through layers of silk. For one impossible moment, she remembered the man she had once loved. Later that night, long after the gala ended, Evelyn returned alone to the manor library seeking refuge from her thoughts. Moonlight filtered through tall windows while dying embers glowed faintly within the hearth. As she crossed the room, she noticed Adrian standing beside his late mother's writing desk, several yellowed letters spread open before him. His face looked stricken. Slowly he lifted one trembling page toward the firelight, revealing a familiar signature at the bottom. His cousin Leopold's handwriting. And beneath it, a sentence that turned Adrian deathly pale. "If the Duchess is ruined," the letter read, "the inheritance shall pass exactly as we intended." Snow gathered along the stone balustrades of Ashbourne Manor like pale ash from a dying fire, muting the world beyond the windows into silence. Days passed beneath heavy winter skies while the scandal surrounding the Duke and Duchess transformed from amusement into fascination. Newspapers no longer questioned whether Adrian Laurent intended to divorce his wife. Society had discovered a far more captivating mystery. Why had the Duke remained beside the woman he once abandoned? Inside the manor, the answer tormented him constantly. Adrian spent his evenings buried within the library, surrounded by ledgers, correspondence, and the bitter realization that his pride had made him blind. Leopold's letters revealed a calculated scheme stretching back months before the separation. Rumors had been planted carefully through servants and acquaintances until suspicion hardened into certainty. Adrian had believed Evelyn faithless because someone understood precisely where to wound him. One night he discovered Evelyn asleep beside the drawing-room fire, a half-finished piece of embroidery resting in her lap. Candlelight softened the exhaustion beneath her eyes. She looked heartbreakingly young in sleep, not like the disgraced Duchess whispered about in ballrooms, but simply a lonely woman carrying too much sorrow alone. As Adrian bent quietly to lift the fallen embroidery from the carpet, something slipped from beside her chair. Letters. Dozens of them. His own handwriting stared back at him from faded envelopes tied carefully with blue ribbon. For several moments he could only stand motionless. Those letters belonged to the earliest days of their courtship. He remembered writing them beside Parliament chamber windows late at night, confessing sentiments he would never have dared speak aloud. Evelyn had preserved every one. A faint movement stirred her awake. She blinked once, startled to find him standing there with the letters in his hands. "You kept them," he murmured. Color drained from her face instantly. "You should not touch what does not belong to you. They are mine." "They were," she corrected softly. Adrian looked down at the worn ribbon around the envelopes. "Why keep reminders of someone who caused you such misery?" Evelyn rose slowly from the chair, one protective hand resting against her stomach. Firelight flickered across her features. "Because I could not decide which memory hurt more," she answered. "The man who once loved me or the man who later believed strangers more easily than his own wife." Adrian stepped toward her instinctively, but she turned away before he could speak. Silence stretched between them while snow tapped gently against the windows. Then suddenly Evelyn swayed. Her hand gripped the edge of the mantle as color vanished from her face. Adrian crossed the room, catching her before she collapsed entirely. "Evelyn." "I am fine," she whispered weakly. "You are trembling." "I said I am fine." But the fragile strength in her voice shattered as dizziness overtook her again. Adrian lifted her into his arms without hesitation. She stiffened immediately, shocked by the intimacy after so many months of distance, yet exhaustion robbed her of resistance. The manor corridor seemed unnaturally still as he carried her upstairs. Servants lowered their eyes respectfully while candlelight glimmered across polished walls. Inside her chamber he settled her carefully upon the bed while the physician was summoned. "You need rest," he said quietly. Evelyn gave a faint, humorless smile. "You speak as though rest alone repairs loneliness." The physician assured them the child remained healthy, though stress and exhaustion endangered Evelyn's strength. After prescribing tonics, he departed into the corridor, leaving husband and wife alone beside the fire. Neither spoke immediately. At last Adrian crossed toward the window overlooking the frozen gardens below. Beyond the glass stood the winter conservatory where Evelyn once spent afternoons tending roses with bare hands despite the thorns. "I read every letter Leopold wrote," Adrian said at last. "He forged evidence. He bribed servants. He wanted the inheritance redirected through his branch of the family if our marriage collapsed." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. "And you believed him?" "Yes." Without asking whether any of it was true. The accusation carried no anger anymore. That absence wounded him more deeply than fury. Adrian turned toward her slowly. "I thought I understood betrayal. And now? Now I understand what I became because of it." The honesty in his voice unsettled her composure at last. Evelyn looked away quickly, but not before he glimpsed tears gathering within her eyes. Outside, snow drifted across the conservatory roof in silver waves. Adrian approached her bedside carefully. "I never stopped loving you," he confessed. Evelyn stared at him silently while emotion flickered across her pale features with painful restraint. "Love does not abandon a woman in disgrace." "No," Adrian whispered. "Cowardice does." His throat tightened visibly before he continued. "Every day apart from you felt like punishment I pretended to deserve. Yet even then my pride mattered more than your suffering." For a long moment Evelyn said nothing. Then tears escaped despite her effort to contain them. "Every night," she whispered shakily, "I prayed you would knock upon that door. Even if only to hate me to my face instead of leaving me alone in silence." Something inside Adrian finally broke. He sank slowly to his knees beside her bed and took her trembling hand between both of his. "I would surrender every title I possess," he said hoarsely, "if it meant undoing the hour I failed you." A sudden movement interrupted him. Beneath his hand the child stirred. Adrian froze. Wonder spread across his face as he felt the unmistakable kick against Evelyn's stomach. Tentatively, reverently, he lowered his forehead against her while emotion overtook him in silence. Evelyn closed her eyes, fingers tightening around his. For the first time in months, neither felt completely alone. Then rapid footsteps thundered down the corridor outside. The chamber door burst open without warning. A breathless servant stood trembling. "Your Grace," he gasped, "Mr. Leopold has fled London. The estate accounts are missing, and the bank fears Ravenshire may already be ruined." Dawn arrived beneath iron-gray clouds that hung low above Ravenshire Manor, turning the ancient estate into something bleak and haunted. The revelations surrounding Leopold's betrayal spread swiftly through the household, poisoning every corridor with unease. Account books had vanished, creditors demanded explanations, and several neighboring estates already whispered that the Duke of Ravenshire stood upon the edge of financial ruin. Yet Adrian seemed almost indifferent to the threat gathering around him. His attention remained fixed upon Evelyn with a devotion that startled everyone who witnessed it, including the woman herself. She noticed the change most clearly during the quiet hours. He no longer avoided her gaze during meals. He walked beside her through the galleries instead of several steps ahead. When she tired easily, he slowed his pace without comment. Small gestures replaced grand declarations, yet those gestures unsettled Evelyn more deeply than speeches ever could. A shawl warmed beside the fire before she entered a room. Fresh flowers appeared beside her bedside table every morning. Once she discovered Adrian asleep in an armchair outside her chamber after she suffered nightmares severe enough to wake the servants. Still, forgiveness remained painfully distant. One storm-darkened afternoon, lawyers arrived from London carrying grim expressions and leather cases filled with contracts. Evelyn listened quietly from the drawing room while raised voices echoed beyond the study doors. Several influential relatives demanded Adrian deny the child publicly until Leopold was captured and the inheritance secured. If scandal weakened the legitimacy of the heir, rival branches of the family could seize portions of the estate permanently. "They smell blood," Adrian said coldly. An elderly uncle leaned heavily upon his cane. They smell vulnerability. There is a difference. The boy is mine. Then protect him wisely, another relative insisted. Distance yourself from the Duchess until this matter settles. Society may forgive suspicion. It never forgives humiliation. Evelyn turned away before anyone noticed the hurt crossing her face. Even now, her existence remained something dangerous to be managed politely behind closed doors. Then Adrian's voice cut sharply through the room. My wife will not bear disgrace to preserve my comfort. Silence followed instantly. The Duke stepped toward the gathered relatives with terrifying calm burning beneath his composure. You ask me to abandon her again because it would soothe your ambitions. I would sooner bury the Ravenshire title itself. His uncle stared at him in disbelief. You speak irrationally. No, Adrian replied quietly. For the first time in years I speak honestly. The meeting ended moments later. One by one the relatives departed beneath gathering thunder while Evelyn remained frozen beside the window, unable to reconcile this man with the husband who once doubted her so easily. That evening, rain lashed violently against the manor. Wind rattled the chandeliers overhead while servants hurried through corridors securing shutters. Evelyn stood inside the nursery Adrian had recently ordered prepared for the child. Firelight flickered across unfinished walls painted soft ivory, illuminating the handcrafted cradle he had commissioned weeks earlier. Her fingertips brushed the carved Ravenshire crest along its side. You truly believe the estate can survive this? She asked softly when Adrian entered behind her. It must. That is not an answer. He approached slowly until only the cradle separated them. The debts are severe, he admitted. Leopold emptied accounts I trusted him to manage. Several investors may withdraw entirely. Fear tightened inside her chest. Then why defend me publicly? You could have saved yourself. Adrian's expression shifted with quiet anguish. Because I finally understood the cost of sacrificing the person I loved for the approval of others. The confession left the room trembling with silence. Before Evelyn could answer, a crash thundered somewhere below. Shouts erupted through the corridor. Smoke curled suddenly beneath the nursery door. Adrian crossed the room instantly and opened it to chaos. Servants raced through the hallway in panic while flames climbed rapidly along the western staircase. Heat struck like a living creature, swallowing curtains and polished banisters in roaring orange light. The west wing is burning, someone screamed. Another servant stumbled forward coughing violently. The fire began in the records room, Your Grace. They believe it was set deliberately. Adrian's face hardened with dreadful understanding. Leopold. Within seconds the smoke thickened, choking the corridor. Adrian wrapped one arm around Evelyn protectively and hurried her toward the eastern staircase, but halfway there she stopped abruptly, her face draining of color. The letters, she whispered. What? Your mother's letters proving Leopold's crimes. They remain in the library. Damn the letters. If they burn, no one will believe you. A beam crashed nearby, scattering sparks across the carpet. Adrian swore beneath his breath while flames spread hungrily toward the ceiling. Go downstairs immediately, he ordered. Evelyn shook her head weakly. Not without you. For one terrible moment he simply stared at her through smoke and firelight, overcome by the unbearable realization that she still feared abandonment more than death itself. Then pain seized her suddenly. Evelyn gasped sharply and clutched her stomach. Adrian caught her before she collapsed. Evelyn. The baby, she whispered breathlessly. Something is wrong. Another wave of agony bent her forward while smoke swallowed the corridor entirely. Panic flashed across Adrian's face for the first time as he lifted her into his arms. Around them the manor groaned beneath spreading flames, servants shouted below, and somewhere within the inferno the evidence capable of destroying Leopold forever waited to vanish into ash. But Adrian no longer hesitated between love and legacy. Holding Evelyn against his chest while thunder shattered the heavens outside, the Duke turned away from the library and ran directly into the burning darkness toward the only staircase still standing. Halfway down the staircase, Evelyn opened her tear-bright eyes and gripped the front of Adrian's coat with desperate strength. Do not leave me, she whispered. He held her closer against the chaos-consuming Ravenshire manor and answered with a vow that sounded more sacred than prayer. Never again, my love, said hoarsely, never. The storm raged through the remainder of the night like divine judgment descending upon Ravenshire manor. Flames devoured the western wing while servants formed frantic lines from the courtyard wells, their lanterns flickering against sheets of rain and smoke. By the time Adrian carried Evelyn through the front doors into the eastern hall, her labor pains had intensified so severely that she could scarcely breathe between them. The physician arrived within minutes, soaked by rain and carrying his black leather case beneath one arm. One glance at Evelyn's condition drained the color from his face. "The child comes too early," he warned quietly. Adrian ignored the terror clawing through his chest and helped lift Evelyn upstairs to the bedchamber overlooking the snow-covered gardens. The room glowed dimly beneath candlelight while thunder rolled across the distant hills. Servants hurried to boil water, warm blankets, and close heavy velvet curtains against the cold creeping through the windows. Evelyn lay against white pillows, her dark hair damp against her temples, one trembling hand locked around Adrian's fingers. Every wave of pain tightened visibly across her body, but she fought each cry with heartbreaking dignity. "You should rest downstairs," she whispered weakly after another contraction passed. Adrian brushed trembling knuckles against her cheek. "You once endured months without me. I shall not endure a single hour away from you now." Outside the chamber, the remnants of Ravenshire's aristocratic family assembled beneath suffocating silence. Some prayed quietly. Others whispered anxiously about the future of the estate should both mother and child perish before dawn. Rumors of Leopold's betrayal had already spread beyond London, and authorities searched desperately for him across the countryside. For the first time in his life, none of it mattered to him. Hours passed beneath the relentless storm. The physician moved constantly between the bed and the fireplace, his expression darkening with each examination. Shortly after midnight he requested a private word with Adrian in the adjoining study. Candlelight trembled over shelves of books while smoke from the distant fire drifted faintly through cracked windows. "You must prepare yourself, Your Grace," the physician said carefully. "Her strength diminishes rapidly. If the labor worsens, I may be forced to choose between saving the mother or the child." The word struck Adrian harder than any blade. "No. I wish there were another solution." "There will be." The physician lowered his gaze with painful sympathy. "Nature does not always negotiate with love, Your Grace." For several moments Adrian stood motionless beside the desk, one hand braced against polished wood as grief threatened to hollow him from within. Then he crossed silently toward the small chapel alcove adjoining the study. Rain hammered the stained glass windows while candle flames bent softly in the draught. Adrian sank to his knees. "I have been proud," he whispered hoarsely into the silence. "Cruel. Blind. I punished the woman I loved because my vanity feared humiliation more than loneliness. If judgment must fall tonight, let it fall upon me instead. Only spare her." A cry echoed suddenly from the bedchamber beyond the doors. Adrian rose instantly and hurried back into the room. Evelyn clutched the sheets with shaking hands while another wave of agony overtook her. The physician and servants surrounded the bed, speaking in hurried voices blurred by panic. Then Evelyn saw Adrian and reached toward him. He crossed the room at once, taking her hand between both of his. "I cannot do this any more," she whispered through tears. "Yes, you can." "I am afraid." The confession shattered him. Adrian pressed her hand against his lips. "Listen to me carefully, Evelyn. You are the bravest soul I have ever known. Not because you survived cruelty, but because you remained gentle afterward. You loved me when I deserved it least," he continued quietly. "And if heaven grants us another lifetime after this one, I shall spend every hour earning that love properly." For the first time that night, Evelyn smiled weakly through her tears. Dawn approached slowly beyond the curtains, turning the storm clouds silver at their edges. The labor reached its terrible climax just as church bells rang faintly across the distant village. Every servant in the corridor fell silent. The physician issued one final command. Then suddenly the room filled with the sharp cry of a newborn child. Relief swept through the chamber so powerfully that several servants wept openly. Adrian stared in stunned disbelief as the physician lifted a small, wailing infant wrapped in white linen. "A son, Your Grace." For one suspended moment the world seemed to stop entirely. Adrian took the child carefully into trembling arms, overcome by emotion too enormous for speech. The infant possessed dark hair curling faintly against his tiny head, and when Adrian looked down into the child's face, he felt something inside him break open completely. Their son. His heir. The living proof of a love he had nearly destroyed with his own hands. But joy vanished quickly when he turned back toward the bed. Evelyn had fallen unconscious. The physician moved urgently beside her while servants exchanged frightened glances. Adrian crossed the room instantly, placing the infant carefully into the nursemaid's arms before dropping beside the bed. "Why is she not waking?" "She has lost considerable strength," the physician admitted gravely. "We can only wait now." Hours passed in dreadful silence. The storm finally faded beyond the windows, leaving Ravenshire Manor wrapped in pale winter light. Adrian never left Evelyn's side. Still wearing soot-stained clothes from the fire, he sat beside her bed with one hand wrapped tightly around hers while their sleeping son rested nearby in the cradle. Authorities arrived during the afternoon. Leopold had been captured attempting to board a ship in Dover. The stolen estate documents were recovered intact, including letters proving years of financial fraud and deliberate deception against the Duchess. Adrian barely listened. Nothing mattered except the stillness of the woman lying before him. As sunset painted the snow outside in shades of amber and gold, Evelyn's fingers finally stirred weakly beneath his hand. Adrian froze. Her eyes opened. For one fragile moment she seemed disoriented by the candlelight, the quiet room, and the exhausted man seated beside her. Then her gaze drifted toward the cradle near the hearth. "Our child?" she whispered. "Alive." The single word nearly destroyed him. Adrian brought her trembling hand to his lips while tears gathered openly in his eyes. "A son," he whispered brokenly. "Beautiful and stubborn, exactly like his mother." Evelyn looked at him silently, astonished by the raw emotion upon his face. "I thought I had lost you," he confessed. "You did once." The truth of it landed softly between them. Adrian bowed his head, unable to deny the wound he created. "Then allow me the remainder of my life to prove I shall never lose you again." For several seconds Evelyn watched him, this proud duke stripped bare of arrogance and distance. All that remained was the man who loved her enough to kneel beside her bed without shame. Then slowly, gently, she touched his face. And Adrian closed his eyes beneath her hand like a man receiving mercy he never believed himself worthy of.